I could call 5 people on the phone right now who have been tortured by the Russians. This is my 5th war zone, 6 if you include Congress.
Comes in on a day 5, I think you said, of the full-scale invasion.
No boxes there from the Red Cross, from the UN. The big international organizations you would expect to be effective in a situation like this were not. There's propagandists in America. Hey, Tucker, how much money is enough? People in the United States don't understand how bad things are, that the Russians are trying to make you crazy.
In March of 2022, nobody was partying in Kyiv.
Nobody's really talking about the elections in Ukraine right now.
How do you feel about the upcoming US elections?
Yeah, how many Shahed drones did Procter & Gamble buy? When you see big corruption, make noise. It's an opportunity to live into one of my core values of freedom. Hochu cappuccino za moloko bez lactosi, будь ласка.
Hi everyone, you're watching Ukrainer in English channel, and this is the series Ukraine Through the Eyes of Others, where we talk with different political experts, academics, journalists about Ukraine and the Russian war against it. And today we're joined by Stephen Moore, a political strategist, international social entrepreneur, political opinion researcher with an experience in more than a dozen countries. He spent 7 years as a chief of staff in the senior leadership aide in the United States Congress, and he's considered one of the most powerful behind-the-scenes voices in the GOP circles. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, thanks for that kind introduction.
I tried.
Yeah, that guy's cool. I want to meet that guy.
I mean, we're meeting him here. Thank you so much for coming today in Kyiv. Well, you're from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I've actually been to Tulsa.
You've been to Tulsa?
I've been to Tulsa.
You know, I can tell by your accent.
Yeah, and I got my accent from Louisiana, United States, where I spent my exchange year in 2015-16. And I don't remember much from my short weekend trip from Shreveport, Louisiana to Tulsa, Oklahoma, but I remember that it's very different from Ukraine. And as somebody who went all the way from Kyiv to Tulsa, Oklahoma, I'm really curious how you went the same way, but in the opposite direction.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Oklahoma, and it's funny. I brought a Ukrainian to Tulsa, and she said the opposite of what you said. She said, Tulsa, Oklahoma is so much like Ukraine. And, you know, I think it's like the fields and the agriculture, and it's, you know, it's kind of flat, and the sun was hot like today. So I'm interested. That's funny. And what did you do in Tulsa?
I think I just visited around. I don't remember much because it was more than 8 years ago, and I was there only for like maybe 2-3 days.
Okay.
But I remember going around the city and like visiting a local high school because my friend went to high school there. So
okay.
Yeah, the reason why I said it was different because I think mentality, the overview of people on the world seemed very different to me at that time, specifically in the American South.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I would agree. You know, Kyiv is a very cosmopolitan city. Tulsa, Oklahoma is a great regional city, and it's a great place to grow up. I left Oklahoma a long time ago, and my mom still lives there. So the question was, how do I get to Ukraine?
Yes.
You know, I lived here in 2018 and 2019 and loved it. It was a great place. You know, the energy here is so different than any place else I've been. And I've been to 60 countries. So, you know, the Ukrainian people are entrepreneurial, they're creative, they're innovative. There's all these cool brands. I mean, look at you guys. You got Ukrainer, this is cool. Look at that t-shirt. So, you know, it's people here, the culture is real. And, you know, in America, in contrast, you know, we've got big blockbuster films like this Barbie film, right? It was made with focus groups, and and so it's manufactured culture. And in Ukraine, the culture is real.
Wow, I never thought about it in that way, but it's really pleasant to hear. You also have an organization that is called the Ukraine Freedom Project.
That's correct.
And you've delivered more than $1 million worth of aid to different parts of Ukraine, including the frontline towns. I was curious how someone like you, who is a foreigner, comes in on a day 5, I think you said, of the full-scale invasion and sets up an NGO that is both, I guess, far-reaching and effective here. What are the challenges maybe that you've faced?
Well, when I came here, the bar was low. So, I came here in day 5 of the war. I had a bunch of friends in Ukraine, and I'm calling them and saying, "Are you okay?" And they're saying things like, "They're bombing Kyiv. I don't know what to do." And I had spent nearly 2 years as a civilian in Iraq during the beginning of that war. This is my 5th war zone, 6 if you include Congress, and so I knew what to do. So I just came here and started trying to help my friends get out of hot spots like Kyiv and Kharkiv and places like that. And then what I found was that the big international organizations you would expect to be effective in a situation like this were not. So after about 3 weeks, all my friends that wanted to be safe were safe. So I'm thinking, what do I do now? Do I just declare victory and go home? And then a friend of a friend called me from Bobrica. You know where that is? It's a little village outside of Kyiv, kind of south of the Zhytomyr road. And he says, I'm trying to help these folks in this clinic. It's a small clinic, not set up to take war wounded, yet we are. Can you help me get medical supplies? And I said, I don't want to go to the front. Call the Red Cross. And he's like, who? And so I ended up putting about $6,000 worth of medical supplies on my credit card. This is before we started raising money, and driving them, up here. And sure enough, there's no boxes there from the Red Cross, from the UN, from, all the boxes were from, St. Mary's Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that sort of thing, right? So I recognized there's a need, and I tried to help fill it. And that's kind of what I've been doing so far since I've been here is what are the hard problems to solve? Because I have a network in Washington, D.C. and around the world. How can I bring that network to bear on the problems here in Ukraine? So that's what I'm doing.
Wow, that sounds pretty cool. Thank you so much for doing that. And in terms of fundraising, because you said that you first started putting your own money and then started to fundraise, who are your top donors? Is it big people who put a lot of cash up front, or is it actually grassroots people in the United States?
There's a few people that you may have heard of, but mostly, my friend Brian is a big donor.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. Brian America, Sacramento, California. Terry and Laura Haynes, Brian Gaston. And I've got 1,000 donors, so I'm going to get in trouble here by, naming specific people, and it would take a long time. So, but just people I know who are good-hearted and want to see Ukraine win. And a lot of my friends would like to be here. People at the beginning of the war call me, dude, I would so much love to be there with you. But, my wife, my kids, mortgage, so I was just in a really fortunate position where a lot of things came together that I could come and help.
Were they interested in Ukraine before, or did this arise?
No. Yes and no. Some of them somewhat, but mostly they're interested in freedom. And, a lot of my friends on Capitol Hill got into the politics business because, they value freedom. It's one, and it's one of my core values. And as an example, I mentioned I was in Iraq for 2 years. I was in Muslim countries for about 3.5 years following September 11th, 2001, because I wanted to try to see if I could help the Muslim world figure out how to solve their problems with words rather than guns and bombs. And so after I was done with that, I got the Arabic word for freedom tattooed on my calf. And so being here in Ukraine is an opportunity to live into one of my core values of freedom. And there's a lot of people in the United States that share that value.
So now I guess you need the Ukrainian word for freedom.
You know a good tattoo artist?
I can recommend you a few here.
How many tattoos do you have?
I have only one.
Yeah?
It's in Ukrainian as well. It's here, you can't see it, but it's a Ukrainian poet who speaks about, who says, if only you knew how beautiful you are when you have no fear within you. And I actually got it tattooed after the full-scale invasion because it's very metaphorical in a way.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. Who's the poet?
Izdrik.
Okay.
Yes. So here in Ukrainer, we also have series called The Occupation, where our team goes to recently liberated, or as we say, deoccupied areas of Ukraine and talk to different people, gathering stories of resistance, talking to people who did everything from the smallest to the most brave acts of courage to make sure that the Russian occupiers feel unwelcomed here. I know that you've been through many places in Ukraine. What are some stories that maybe stuck with you?
You know, I have a friend, Dennis. Okay, when I was here in 2019, Dennis was my trainer at the gym, and super cool guy. Just big, lovable, caring guy, and super fun. And he was actually the guy that picked me up at the border whenever I came in, because I was like, it's like, he had been in Donbass in 2014. So I was like, he knows which end of an AK-47 works, right? And so I said, Dennis, I'm in Romania, just outside Chernivtsi. Can you come get me? So Dennis came, got me. We started working together to get people out. We started working together with the Kyiv Territorial Defense, and he became a very effective part of that force. And then he ended up, he is in the Ukrainian Special Forces, and he's been wounded twice, and he keeps going back. And he's just an amazing human being, because he maintains he's seen and done horrible things, and because he's had to, and he maintains his sense of humor, and he's just good energy guy despite what's happened to him. People in the United States don't understand how bad things are in Ukraine, and I tell them it's so Ukraine is better than you think, and it's worse than you think, because Kyiv is a highly functioning city. And we're in Kyiv right now, and it's a nice place to be, which is good, right? Because in March of last year, I was here, and it wasn't like this. There was hedgehogs everywhere. There was checkpoints every 100 meters, and you could hear artillery. It was not a good place to be, and now it is. Now, so Ukraine is better than you think. It's also worse than you think, because you look at places like Saltivka or Izum, or many of the places that have been thoroughly destroyed by the Russians, and the terrible things the Russians do, like people in America. There's propagandists in America that say things. I heard this thing on Tucker Carlson. You know who Tucker Carlson is?
Of course, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's my own will.
Yeah, very bad man. It wasn't always, but so there's this guy he has on, his Colonel, Douglas McGregor. McGregor says, he's like this Russian apologist. He says, no, and the Russians are very gentle with Ukrainians when they capture them. And that just blew my mind, because I could call 5 people on the phone right now who have been tortured by the Russians, So your question was the bravery of Ukrainians, and the people I know that have been tortured just kind of take it in stride. Yeah, they held me in a basement for 3 days, and yeah, what's for dinner? So the resiliency of the Ukrainians is amazing, and the innovations and the stuff they're doing, it's amazing.
It's really amazing to see somebody like you to actually get to see it firsthand, and because it's, as you said, very important, because you have this firsthand context, while somebody who sits at Tucker Carlson's show talking about things that just, I don't know, either straight up Russian propaganda and Russian lies, which makes you question, like, how do those things get funded? Where that show gets support, or just doesn't understand anything and still dares to speak on the behalf of Ukrainians themselves.
Yeah, Yulia, let's take Tucker Carlson as an example. So, you can find the Kremlin propagandists saying something on Tuesday on their shows. Tucker will say it on Wednesday on his show, and on Thursday, the same Kremlin propagandist will air a clip from Tucker Carlson's show. And so there's a symbiotic propaganda relationship there. And, Tucker's worth $400 million. So, hey, Tucker, how much money is enough? Yeah. So it's just, it's mind-boggling to me And I've met Tucker Carlson. I worked with him on a project like 10 or 12 years ago. And, we're both from San Diego. We both have San Diego ties. I grew up in Tulsa, but I spent a lot of my professional life in San Diego. We knew some of the same people. And he was really a charming man 12 years ago. I don't know what happened to him.
Yeah, that's a good question. So how do you think we, or maybe you guys in the United States of America, can actually counteract what comes from Tucker Carlson? Because he got a very powerful platform. I know that he doesn't have Fox anymore, but he's back on Twitter, and he's pretty effective there. If you see the reach of his stuff that he puts out, if you see then how then like people react and how they boost that propaganda, what are some, I don't know, maybe like ways of challenging that?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And, and I think that what I'm finding is that people in America don't know who to believe. And so people of goodwill in America don't have time to come here and have a look around like I have. And the news media in America is not as trustworthy as it used to be. In any left wing, right wing, anything in the middle, nobody trusts the media anymore. So how do you know what the real story is? And, I think that one thing for people in America, if the Kremlin is repeating, the newscaster you're watching, if the Kremlin thinks it's a good idea to watch them, they're probably not the people to watch. But I think more powerfully, the people in America who have a personal experience of Ukraine are just on board, right? They understand it. So what I'm finding is that when people like on social media just reach out, Ukrainians reach out to Americans that maybe they don't know and just say, thank you for your help. The Patriot missiles keep my family and I safe at night. I just want to say thank you. So any way that Ukrainians can say thank you, I think is a good thing to do.
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, they saved us tonight. I don't know if you heard the missiles coming into Kyiv. I don't know if it was missiles or drones, but actually they're, I think like my mom woke me up around like 5 a.m. because—
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
Okay.
You didn't hear that? No?
I sleep
Maybe.
very well.
Maybe, yeah, because you have a very tight sleep.
Yeah.
But they also like, I think like the debris were falling around the area where I live. So
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for that specifically. I think like here in Kyiv, we can really feel the difference between when we didn't have the Patriot missiles and now that we do. We hear a lot of obviously the shooting down and outcoming missile, but it's not as, I guess, scary anymore, and more people feel more safe in this area thanks to Patriot missiles.
Yeah. Well, I used to work at an artificial intelligence company called Data Robot, which had about 500 employees here in Ukraine, which is yet another Ukrainian connection for me. And I did the math in, I guess it was in February. There's about 4 months worth of missiles at that point. So I did the math, and my friends in DC were 4 times more likely to die in a traffic accident than I was to die from missiles in Ukraine. So, it's good that people are not afraid, because these are not military weapons. These are not weapons that are meant to degrade Ukraine's ability to wage war. These are weapons to make people afraid. And, and again, in Kyiv, I think it was like you're 9 times more likely to die in a traffic accident than you are from a missile. So if you're really worried about your own safety, don't get in a car, but don't worry about missiles.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still obviously a different psychological weight when you hear it every night, especially like we did in May and beginning of June 2023, because basically Russians were bombing Kyiv every night.
Yeah,
and
I was here.
But yeah, by the 20th night, you're like, yeah, like this is really depleting my mental health and ability to kind of think straight.
Exactly what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And again, the real danger, that's not the real danger does not come in your life every day. The real danger does not come from missiles. They are something that is designed that the Russians are trying to make you crazy. And so I admire the people of Kyiv and Ukraine more broadly, because, they're living through this, they're functioning well. Again, we're here in Kyiv. It's a very highly functioning city. Things are going really well. So, and that's because the Ukrainians are resilient and courageous.
Yeah, and we hope to get as much as we can from the United States to be resilient, courageous for as long as we can. So we're really grateful for that. Pivoting to your professional and political background, you're often described as one of the most prominent behind-the-scenes voices in the Republican Party for Ukraine. And I've actually had a very interesting story with somebody that I deeply admire from the Republican Party. I was visiting DC during the same exchange year when I was in Louisiana. And I very accidentally ran into John McCain.
No way.
He was actually going to a hearing on Ukraine
In Louisiana?
No, sorry, in DC.
Okay.
When I was staying in Louisiana, but then I traveled to DC for like a short program there, and we got to visit actually the United States Congress and to hear these public hearings because we were like so amazed. Wow, this is so open, and we actually can sort of like firsthand see the U.S. democracy at play. And John McCain was rushing to a hearing on Ukraine. He was carrying an image of Ukrainian political prisoner in Russia at that time, and that's how I sort of like recognized like, oh, it's something that has to do with us. And at first I didn't actually recognize him, but then it kind of like struck me, and I sort of like said, hi, I'm from Kyiv, Ukraine, and I'm really grateful for your support. And at that time, he was sort of like the embodiment of the Republican Party, like the greatest sort of principle.
Presidential candidate in 2008.
Yeah, and values that I thought it represented, and the way he understood foreign policy and specifically policy in Russia and Ukraine was pretty remarkable back then because lots of lawmakers, it felt like, didn't. That's why Crimea and other things happened without essentially no response. But today we see very different, I guess, actors in the Republican Party that have little to almost like no understanding of foreign policy, MJT, other people who are very actively advocate against support of Ukraine. So I wonder, as an insider, I guess, how do you deal with that divide inside? Yeah,
well, again, there's people in Congress, and more importantly, there's people outside of Congress. I don't know if you ever heard of the Heritage Foundation?
Yes, I did.
So the Heritage Foundation is a big think tank, is what they've billed themselves as, but they're not really thinking anymore. And what they're doing is they're pushing really dangerous policies by meme. And, you know, at one time they had a lot of people that were really doing good foreign policy work, and they were really concerned about the national debt, and they would push out these really detailed, insightful papers. And now they've replaced all those people with people that knows how to use TikTok really well. And these folks are going after the $25 billion request for additional aid to Ukraine. And it's really dangerous. The rhetoric they're using is really dangerous because they're trying to undermine the coalition that is supporting Ukraine. And someone has to stand up to these people. And, you know, I'm one of the people doing it. And someone needs to stand up to the Heritage Foundation's dangerous rhetoric that is trying to undermine the coalition of international support that is helping keep Ukraine free. And if they're successful in undermining this coalition, the world becomes a less safe place. It will embolden Xi Jinping to go into Taiwan, because if the coalition that is supporting Ukraine evaporates after 18 to 24 months, Xi Jinping looks at that and he's like, I can make that deal. You know, if all I got to do is after I invade Taiwan, all I got to do is wait 2 years and the world will forget about it. Let's send the jets. So you know, I'm one guy with a small NGO, but I'm telling everyone who will listen that folks like the Heritage Foundation, folks like Tucker Carlson do not represent the Republican Party. Not only that, they don't represent good foreign policy.
Yeah, that's good to hear that we have people like you there as well. One of the many arguments that these anti-Ukraine I guess, anti-supporters use is that, oh, we don't know where the money is going. Like, we've heard it many times from some of these actors and pretty high up lawmakers in DC. And you've said multiple times that actually the aid to Ukraine is one of the best use of your tax money. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, this is actually really easy. And anybody that says that they're worried about where the money is going, they're worried about where the weapons are going, is not really thinking this out very well. Because we've spent about $48 billion in weapons and security measures for Ukraine. That's over 2 years. This year, the U.S. Department of Defense will spend $800 billion. $800 billion. And aid to Ukraine is an amount equal to about 3% of that. And for that money, Ukraine has taken back 87% of its land. Ukraine is now in control of 87% of its land. And the UK Ministry of Defense estimates that Putin's warfighting capability has been degraded by half. Now, the U.S. Department of Defense has been spending, on a scale of $800 billion a year for decades, in part to deter Russia. And they haven't deterred Russia because Russia's gone into Georgia. There's Chechnya back in the day. There was, Ukraine twice.
Syria, yeah.
Yeah, Syria, yeah. And so this is the most effective money we have spent to deter Russia. And so on the face of it, it's money well spent. And if there's, if there's some, it's a war. If some of the money is misspent, these things happen. But the result of 3% of the budget of the U.S. Department of Defense has been degrading Putin's fighting capabilities by half.
Yeah, it's actually my favorite thing is when I see sometimes people saying like, oh my gosh, like these people in Kyiv are partying, where my money are going, like how are they being spent? And I'm like, but this is the biggest proof that your money are being well spent, because just as you say, in March of 2022, nobody was partying in Kyiv because things in Kyiv were very, very difficult.
Yeah.
But Ukrainians were able to fight back with the help of United States specifically. And right now, people in Kyiv and other liberated places, like I come from a village outside of Kyiv that was occupied, and now I'm able to go back and see my family again and see my home again. Yeah. So this is the biggest proof, I think, that the money are going to the place that it needs to be.
Kyiv is functioning well. It wasn't last year. And nobody's partying in Melitopol. No one's partying in Mariupol. Donetsk, it's a really tough neighborhood. So there's a lot of Ukraine where people are being tortured and abused every day by the Russians. And it is a testament to the partnership between the U.S. and Ukraine to degrade the warfighting capabilities of one of America's biggest adversaries for decades. It is a testament to that partnership that things are going well in Kyiv. And, and I tell people in the United States that the Ukrainians view this as a partnership. It's, the U.S. and Europe and Japan and other places are providing the weapons, and Ukraine is providing the lives of their very best people.
Another thing that we hear right now in the GOP specifically, but in a lot of allies in Europe and the United States, is the topic of Ukrainian elections during the war. As we know, Ukrainian constitution specifically prohibits conducting elections during an active war because of different economic and other challenges and security challenges, even ensuring that everybody can vote, from the refugees across the world to people in the trenches who are defending our country. It's a big challenge, but I know that even within the Republican Party, even those who are really, really support Ukraine are kind of on the verge on this topic. And our partners at Opora organizations, who are actually a leading non-governmental and non-partisan Ukrainian organizations that overviews the democratic election process, they actually conducted research looking at this narrative about the Ukrainian elections in the United States and how some people use it specifically to undermine the support. I'm curious, what's your personal opinion on this topic, or maybe how do you hear about it in your circles?
Yeah, good question. Frankly, nobody's really talking about the elections in Ukraine right now among my circles on Capitol Hill. We're talking about the U.S. elections. But there's certainly a lot of narratives out there. One of the things that people talk about is Zelensky is persecuting Christians, which is nonsense.
Yeah.
And what's happened is the Russians have taken the narrative of arresting Russian Orthodox priests who are spying for the Kremlin and saying that's a persecution of Christians. And again, it's just nonsense. You don't even have to dig real deep on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a tough time to have elections. And I don't know whether it is a good time to have elections. I think that's kind of up to the Ukrainian people to decide. It is, on the one hand, elections are by their nature divisive. And is this a time to have a lot of divisive rhetoric internal to Ukraine? And on the other hand, this is a democracy. People want to vote. People want to express their opinion. I don't have a good answer to it.
How do you feel about the upcoming U.S. elections?
Yeah, there's a really interesting group of Republican candidates. There's a lot of really good people up there. Tim Scott is someone I know pretty well. I helped him in his first ever election to the U.S. House of Representatives. A really good human. Nikki Haley, I've met her a couple of times. I have a lot of friends that know her well. And I thought she just really took the stage at this last debate.
On Ukraine specifically?
Yeah. So she, if you want a foreign policy candidate, she's it. She's great. Mike Pence also did well in Ukraine. Chris Christie's fun because he'll never win, but he just goes after Donald Trump at every opportunity. And here is Vivek Ramaswamy is the new name. And I stayed up till 6 a.m. to watch these debates here in Kyiv. And I thought Vivek Ramaswamy was, I don't know if this translates well into Ukraine, but for me, for Americans, you're in 8th grade, you're 14 years old, and there's always some kid that's like, pick me, I know the answer, pick me, I know the answer. That was Vivek Ramaswamy on these debates. And, he was childish to the point of being cartoonish. And he is overeager and unknowledgeable, certainly on Ukraine. He's like, I know the answer, but he didn't know the answer. He did not know much about Ukraine at all. And so hopefully, I see him as someone that is has his day in the sun and then he crashes hard. So hopefully he takes his anti-Ukraine narrative and crashes hard with it. But in general, again, there's organizations and there's forces in the United States that are trying to inject Ukraine into the national debate for the Republicans. And it's not helpful because it's not accurate. People that are worried about the national debt are worried about $25 billion that's going to be voted on in October, which is 0.3% of the national budget. 0.3, whereas if you look at the COVID spending over the last several years, that is twice of what we're spending this year. We're going to spend $6.9 trillion. That's what they're voting on. COVID spending is $15 trillion. But no one's talking about that. They're talking about this $25 billion for Ukraine. So why? I think Russian propaganda is effective.
Yeah, and it's really disappointing because sometimes you hear these arguments and you feel like, do people not understand that you can't really help the internal problems with poverty or other things with javelin missiles and things?
Yeah.
Those things don't really.
Yeah. I would say this. America does have problems with the southern border. And if we want to start using howitzers there, that's a conversation we need to have as a nation. Otherwise, we could probably send them to Ukraine.
Yeah, I think that would be a more reasonable decision. And we definitely can put them to a way better use for a better cause. And I think also that it's very interesting to ask you as a policymaker or somebody from that background on the question of sanctions against Russia.
Yeah.
We see that despite pretty heavy sanctions, Russian economy is still sort of striving. And not only that, but also according to the KSE, Kyiv School of Economics research on the Western components in the Russian missiles and other war equipment, we see that a lot of these Western-produced microchips, semiconductors, are ending up in the hands of Russians, even in 2023, and being used then to effectively kill Ukrainians. How do you think, or is it possible even, to enforce better system of sanctions and prevent that from happening?
That is an excellent question, and there's several hundred U.S. and even more international corporations that are still doing business in Russia. I don't drink Red Bull anymore. I used to drink sugar-free Red Bull all the time. And Gillette razors, Procter & Gamble is a very preachy company. They want to make sure their consumers of their products are indoctrinated with their values, but they still have two very large manufacturing plants in Russia. Gillette razors, the biggest manufacturing facility of Gillette razors is in St. Petersburg. So there's that, right? So there needs to be the same level of outrage from Americans about companies doing business in Russia that there is among other social issues. I would like to see that. And to your point about evading sanctions and microchips, do you know the country in Europe that is the most prolific by a lot in getting these things into Russia, getting microchips and that sort of thing?
I'm not sure, but I would guess Hungary?
Yeah, good guess. Right around the corner. Switzerland.
Switzerland?
Switzerland.
Okay, that would be my second guess.
Yeah. So Kyle Parker, not a household name, but he has probably done more against Russia than almost anyone else. Bill Browder, you know that name? So Bill Browder has a book called Red Notice. The short story about Bill Browder is that he was an American businessman, started in Russia in like the 90s, did a lot of foreign investment there, built a big business and made a lot of money in Russia. And at some point, 10 years ago or so, he got in Putin's crosshairs, and Putin killed one of his business partners, a guy named Magnitsky. So Browder stopped being a businessman and became a public policy entrepreneur. And Kyle Parker is the legislative staffer who wrote the legislation called the Magnitsky Act that enables the pinpoint sanctioning of certain individuals in places like Russia that are doing terrible things. And so Kyle Parker's wife is from Kharkiv. And so Kyle is thinking about sanctions that can help Ukraine every day. And I would encourage anyone to follow him at Kyle Parker, maybe at Kyle Parker Net on Twitter. Helsinki Commission is the organization he works for. But last time I was in DC, there was a hearing on Switzerland. Switzerland, by far, gets the most illegal stuff into Russia, and they have $48 billion, it's estimated, of Russian assets in their control from oligarchs and that sort of thing. And 7 of it has been frozen, and they are working to give it back. And so the Swiss say they're neutral, but they're not.
They're not.
They're making a ton of money off of sanctions on Russia.
How do you think we can collectively, especially as, I guess, like consumers, people, create this buzz around specifically these brands like Gillette, Procter & Gamble, to make sure that people are aware about this happening, but also that they care and they understand that them buying and supporting this company is effectively, non-directly, but still supports the Russian war machine? Yeah.
No, Procter & Gamble, make no mistake, has put at least $5 million in taxes, and that was in 2022, into the Russian coffers. How much is a Caliber missile? You know, how much is a Shahed drone, right? 20,000? Yeah, how many Shahed drones did Procter & Gamble buy? So, you know, again, I think it is just keeping the pressure on. If folks just do that every day, you know, and remind the folks that tweet at Procter & Gamble, tweet at whoever else, you know, about their bad behavior, I think it helps.
Yes, Russia trying to circumvent sanctions and doing it very effectively and keeping up their military arsenal. There are a lot of conversations in Ukraine that we also should be doing that and not just like relying on the support of partners, but specifically investing into the military industry here, investing in a sense also getting private donors possibly interested in this industry. Military tech is a new kind of attractive topic here too. What are your thoughts on that? Are you familiar with this?
I have two thoughts. One is I am aware of a huge amount of pent-up demand from investors in the United States into Ukraine. And a lot of it is around the military tech because nobody has more experience now in making weapons and using weapons to fight what we call in America a near-peer adversary like Russia. And so the Ukrainians are becoming the best soldiers in the world. And people want to be a part of that. Investors want to be a part of that. And what's holding them back is the fear of corruption. Corruption takes a lot of forms. And I think there needs to be a zero tolerance for corruption among the Ukrainian people. And don't take part in even small corruption. And when you see big corruption, make noise. Because Ukraine is at an inflection point right now. And, there's a path that Ukraine can take. It can take the path that gets at lots of foreign investment and that creates a brilliant future for Ukraine, or it can keep going down the same path where it's commonly known as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And I think there is hope for Ukraine on the corruption front because I talk to soldiers at the front. I say, have you seen any corruption around American weapons? Because I want to go back, I want to find out, right? So I want to go tell my friends. And the answer is always some variation on, no, I have not seen corruption. And if I did, I would shoot that person. And I talk to Ukrainians on the street, what do you think about corruption? And they say things like, too many people have died. We're not going back to the old ways. So I see a real hope for Ukraine because the Ukrainian people are no longer tolerating what has been happening here for so long, but we're not out of the woods yet. If the war's over and everyone kind of goes back to, doing what they're doing, and there's still people using the old ways, you hear about it. And so I think the Ukrainian people need to, if there's an activism that needs to take place that the Ukrainian people can be most powerful in, it is internally and driving out corruption.
Yes, I think actually that the fact that these corruption scandals coming out and people actually talking about them, publications are writing about them, and activists in Ukraine are being very vocal and also producing that information not only in Ukrainian but also in English is actually a testament to the fact that Ukrainians are fighting it.
I would agree. And what's difficult for people abroad to recognize is that a Supreme Court justice was just taken out for corruption, right? That's bad news. The good news is a Supreme Court justice was just taken out for corruption, right? I talk to friends, they're like, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we never would have thought that would happen. And I think that's the message that needs to get out. I think the Ukrainian people need to have a zero tolerance policy, and then they need to get that message out.
Yeah, and I think it's in the best interest of us to do that, obviously, to foster the trust of the foreign partners. And as you said, corruption takes many forms. It happens in many places. Obviously, it's kind of sad that this part of the world is notoriously known for that. And we always talk about this and analyze sort of in historic way where it's coming from. And if you look at the history of corruption, it's coming from kind of the Russian way of dealing with things, because that country literally functions on corruption basis. And obviously that country had a lot of influence on still generations that are currently living in Ukraine and taking up these positions. But hopefully we can see that the young people are really, as you say, kind of zero tolerance stance on corruption.
Yeah.
When we talk about the future of Ukraine, we often say that it's literally being decided right now on the battlefield. But when it comes to things like corruption and other like policies, we understand that it's also important to not overlook other spheres of the development of the country, the progress. And I'm curious just to like talk to somebody who's not Ukrainian. How do you see Ukraine after victory? Obviously, victory can take many forms. So maybe that's not the question. It's more like, how do you see Ukraine both internally and on the international arena?
That is a good question. This war has obviously been horrible on a number of levels. And Ukraine has lost a lot of really good people. And the good news about this war is that in January of 2022, probably like 7% of Americans could point to Ukraine on a map. Now everyone knows about Ukraine. And I think the great news about Ukraine is things like, the IT sector has grown dramatically during the war, and it still is. Ukraine is home to so many smart people, smart, creative, innovative people. And I think that is a story that's getting out. And I think that Ukraine has the potential to be like the next big IT place, right? I mean, like Silicon Valley East, right? And it's got the human capital. The people here work hard, and the people here are innovative. And the people, my Ukrainian friend I took to the United States said that, the U.S. is so much like Ukraine because it's, they value freedom and they're entrepreneurial and they're innovative. And that's the way she saw the two cultures aligning. And I think that's true. And, what you need is governance that matches that and helps that grow. And I think you'll get there. Because again, I just remember this young woman I met on the street. I didn't even know her name and never talked to her again. I was just talking to her about it. And she said, we're not going back to the old ways. Too many people have died. And I think that's something that is shared by Ukrainians, and certainly people under 35 or so. And so I think that, I'm super hopeful. I'm here, man. I live here by choice. I could be in the United States right now. I'm a volunteer. I could be in the United States having a good job and making a lot of money and, watching Netflix every night, and in a nice apartment. But I'm here. And you know why? Because I have faith in the Ukrainian people and I want to be a part of what's going on here.
Yeah, I guess watching a TV show on Netflix, a history TV show, is not that interesting as actually watching the real history happening here in Ukraine. So I'm glad that you're choosing to do that. Lastly, I wanted to ask you, what's your favorite place in Ukraine?
Good question. I was just recently in the Carpathians. Really nice. Really enjoyed that. It's a beautiful part of the world. So that's really nice. Kyiv, like right here where we are, is this is nice. Here's what I like about Kyiv is that you can walk everywhere and there's places to walk and people are out and there's interesting people doing interesting things on the street. You've got street artists, you've got, there's people like playing the cello, just beautiful cello music, really talented musicians. Just being outside in Kyiv and walking around, just the vibe, the energy, and the beauty, and the history, and, what's not to like about Kyiv? Except for the occasional missile.
That's true. But hopefully that will stop sooner than later. Is there something that you've learned about Ukrainian culture that maybe you've been mistaken for like Russian culture before? And now that you live here, actually, you're...
Yellow blue borscht.
Yellow blue borscht.
I don't even like beets, but I like them in borscht.
I mean, how do you not like borscht?
I'm learning Ukrainian. Хочу cappuccino za moloko bez lactosi, будь ласка.
Oh, I'm also lactose intolerant in case, yeah, in case you are. So I say the same thing. Yeah.
And yeah, so I've come to appreciate a lot of the things. I tell my friends, it's like, Taras Shevchenko is like Ukraine's George Washington. He's a poet, and they're kind of like, I wish they had more heroes that killed people. But I like the poet culture. I mean, there's all these great poets that things are named after, and so.
I don't know if you've seen that we're erasing the Russian poets and all of those people from the street names, the city names, and other things, because it's a really important effort in order to de-Russify the country.
No, I thought, someone said, why are they spending the money on taking the hammer and sickle off of the motherland statue? And I was like, seems like a good idea to me. Let's completely erase Russian and Soviet influence from Ukraine, because that's kind of part of the narrative. Oh, Ukraine's really part of Russia. No, it's not. There's a great book, The Gates of Europe.
Yes, Sergei Plokhy.
Yeah, that guy's awesome. I read that book, and and like that book, every chapter is answers the question, and this is why Ukraine is an independent country, and so that was a really interesting book. Loved that book.
Yeah, everybody should read that book if you're interested in Ukraine and understanding why it's not a part of Russia and why it's fighting so fiercely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was really interesting to talk to you and hear your insights. And thank you for your volunteering and for your valuable work in helping Ukraine, both, I guess, in DC and here inside the country.
Let me just add,
yes, please.
I got to do some self-promotion here.
Definitely.
So folks can follow me on Twitter. I'm on Ukraine Freedom 7 on Twitter. Instagram, Ukraine_freedom_project. Follow me on Instagram. And my website is ukrainefreedomproject.org. Follow me on Twitter, send me a message. Follow me on Instagram.
Thank you,
would love to hear
Stephen.
from people.
You were watching Ukrainer in English and our series Ukraine Through the Eyes of Others, where we're joined by Steve Moore. Thank you so much for coming today, and please follow Ukrainer in English on YouTube. Comment if you really found this video insightful, and we're going to be back with new guests. Thank you.